not bad. Hey, once again, watchers of good anime, my name is Pell, and these are my picks for the best anime of summer 2019. Now, a few points to touch on before I start diving into my list of the top 10. I will not be including two core shows which are on their second core, so shows like Yuno and Demon Slayer from last season are not, and Fruits Basket are not going to be included in this list because I already covered them in the spring video for this, and so I don't want to give them double treatment. That also being said, I'm not going to be including shows which are on their second season, so something of the lines of like Danmachi, aka Is It Okay to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon Season 2. I will also not be including, despite the fact that I really enjoyed the second season. I'm looking forward to the third. And then also ongoing shows like Boruto, I'm also not including on this list. So it's going to be purely original anime which are debuting for the first time this season. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Oh, I should probably also say this. I will be touching on spoilers because I'll be covering pretty much the entirety of the seasons of the shows, of the 25 shows that I watched. We're not talking about all 25, but I'll be talking about the 10 in their entirety thus far. So there are some shows which are two core, which are only like 13-ish episodes in. I'll talk about what we've seen so far. So please don't put spoilers in the comments for those, if you would be so kind. Now, number 10 on this list, it's kind of like an up in the air type of placement because there's a lot of shows which could have just filled this spot because there was really just a top 9 for me this season. There wasn't really a 10th big standout for me. So the one that I gave it to is The Ones Within. It was on Funimation/Hulu this season. It's basically about, I believe, 8 gamers who are specialized in a variety of different genres. They all get brought into this, I'm trying to remember if it's in a virtual world or if it's like on this mysterious island. I think it's just a mysterious island. And they're forced to play these games and acquire a certain amount of views for each game that they get in order to win their freedom. And it doesn't really have like this hostage situation or like being forced to do these games otherwise you die type of thing. It has a really lighthearted feel to it for something which could have been really taken super seriously. A lot of the characters are really fun to see on screen. They work well together. There's a lot of good chemistry amongst them. And once you kind of got into the meat of the story, it sets up something which could be very interesting to see play out in further seasons. It doesn't really wrap up the story with this one season. So I'm really curious to see what it does. Especially towards the end of the season where we had one of the main characters go and basically join this underground resistance of previous characters who have played this game and have basically gone underground hiding from the bunny-eared guy. And it's just kind of interesting to see that faction. I would have liked to see more of that just spread out more throughout the season because I thought that side of it was also very interesting. I would have liked to see that come into play a little bit more. But yeah, overall, I think The Ones Within, it's a very fun show to watch. It doesn't do anything groundbreaking by any means. And it took me a little while to really get into it because it's kind of a slow starter despite its interesting characters. But by the end, I was very intrigued, and I'm curious to see if it does get a season 2 or some sort of follow-up outside of the written material, what it does past this point. Number 9 on this list is going to go to Copcraft. This is another show which I believe was a Funimation Hulu-esque show. A lot of Funimation shows show up on Hulu as well if you're not aware. It basically deals with this portal to a fantasy world or an alternate world with fantasy-esque creatures in it. The world's governments or whatever, they form some sort of treaty to share resources, and the inhabitants of that fantasy world end up immigrating to our world, essentially. And the majority of them end up living in this one populated city, which kind of is a spot just where they all live together in supposed harmony. Of course, there's crime and whatnot that takes place. And the majority of the show focuses on this human detective and then this female warrior lady from the fantasy world. And they basically team up to solve crimes and figure out this underlying scheme which is taking place over the course of the season. I did have some slight issues with the show, I will admit that. Just at least there's a two-parter about midway through in which the main female character gets turned into a cat, or her mind gets switched with a cat, and so it does some kind of weird things with the cat inhabiting her body. Just because it's a cat, it doesn't know about human decency and all that stuff. And so it just kind of went to some weird places, I thought, which weren't immensely necessary. So that's the biggest issue that I had with it, was just those 2 episodes, even though the second episode kind of wraps it up pretty quick with that issue. Generally, though, it's a very fun show to watch. It has a really fun opening as well. It's really interesting to see this interaction between these 2 characters develop over the course of the show, because initially main human character's partner, he ends up getting killed very early on in the first episode, and then he ends up stuck with this alien new sidekick, and so he's very against her initially, and you kind of seen this type of thing play out before with other type of shows, but eventually they grow closer and they become good partners and all that jazz. I do like that there's not immense like romantic chemistry between them. Like, you can tell that there's like some feelings going on between the 2, but it's not like they're very obvious about it. They're much more seriously like focused on what the job is at hand before diving into like the lovey-dovey crap. And so I did appreciate that, and it made it feel a little bit more unique in that aspect, because it could have just been a full-blown like rom-com if it wanted to. But it takes itself seriously enough and explores some really interesting themes in regards to like kind of like racism and bigotry and kind of things which we see today in our modern society. And so it's a really fun show to watch. It's not done yet as a film. I believe the finale is on Monday. But for the majority that I've seen thus far, it's quite fun to see play out, and I'm very curious to see how it ends. And so I hope that this also gets a 2nd season, as the majority of these shows I hope do, and some already have been announced for. Why does this taste so bad? Number 8 is the show this season which everyone seems to love to hate for some reason, and that is Vorta from Commonplace to World's Finest. General setup for this show, if you're not aware, is that it deals with it's basically an isekai type of anime in which this class of students get transported to an alternate world of fantasy things. It's isekai, and one of the characters who ends up being our main character, he's a little under-leveled, and he ends up falling to his supposed demise in this dungeon which his class is trying to navigate, and then in order to survive after losing his arm, he ends up having to eat the monsters that he's able to kill, and thus he ends up gaining supernatural abilities and is able to level up very, very quickly as a result. Basically form modern weapons such as guns and other things of that sort to make him kind of be overpowered. And he eventually meets this vampire girl who's basically the last of the vampires. They end up teaming up and hooking up essentially. And he ends up having to try to find and track down these dungeons throughout the course of the world and discover the secrets within them in order to get back home. Now, I'll just deal with the main issue people have right away. There's really bad CGI in this show. I'm not gonna lie or deny that whatsoever. When there's like giant creatures on screen, such as like big boss battles or something, it doesn't look great. Yeah, it's not fun to look at. There was an episode recently where our main characters basically had to fend off this huge army of monsters, and when the monsters are animated similarly to the show, it looks great and it looks fine and everything. But in instances where you see them like CGI and it doesn't look great, it's very, very obvious. And so I wish that the show maybe would have taken a little more time to polish itself and make the CGI just look better. Maybe they just weren't expecting people to really care that much about the show. I have no idea. But outside of that, it's a really fun show to watch. It does go some weird places, but isekais have done much weirder things, I think, from what I've seen at least. He's kind of similar to Naofumi from Rising of the Shield Hero earlier this year in that he's kind of an outcast among his peers and generally of society, and just has kind of a bad attitude. But when things kind of start to happen around him where his skills and help are needed, he is willing to assist as long as there's something in it for him. And I just kind of enjoyed seeing that aspect come to light. I think that it's a fun show. It still has like 3 episodes left for some reason because they like skipped a week or 2. But overall, I am liking it. If it does get a season 2, I do hope that it is a little more polished with the CGI. But overall, I am enjoying it, and it's a very fun show to watch. It's a more unique isekai, I think, than at least other things that I've seen, and has a different twist on the whole idea. So yeah, Ari Vorta, from Commonplace to World's Finest. This is another Funimation Hulu show as well. The first 3 of these have been. So go see it there if you want to. Number 7 on this list is a music anime which debuted on Crunchyroll this season, and that is Given. The story focuses on 2 guitar players, one who is a novice at guitar and the other person who has been playing for many years, who ends up teaching this guy, and they end up part of a band, and the majority of the show focuses on this band playing together, getting better, their interactions, and seeing developments and relationships occur between them. It is a show which focuses on guys falling in love with other guys, and so if that's something which turns you off or isn't your thing for whatever reason, fine, whatever, don't watch it. But it doesn't. It's very innocent in that respect. It's really just kissing. It doesn't like show sex or anything like that. And I do like that more shows are deciding to focus on just I guess non-traditional ideas of romance, just not solely guy-girl type of stuff. Because like last season, Sarazanmai, this show is more serious than that, but I do think it takes a good look at homosexuality and kind of, especially our main character being someone who has never really thought of himself, as far as I can tell, as being in a relationship with another guy, seeing his reaction to that, his acceptance of that eventually, and just seeing where that ends up leading him. I also enjoyed the backstory of the novice guitar player, who I'm gonna not know like any names in this video. I'm sorry, but the redhead or orange-haired guy. I enjoyed seeing his backstory, kind of why he's so quiet and why he's so hesitant to really engage with people, and seeing what tragedy he is really trying to cope with. Because you get kind of hints laid out throughout the course of the show, but it's not really until the performance, because I do end up performing on stage at one point towards the end of the season, and that's probably the best episode, I would say, just in regards to kind of bringing to the high point really big story arcs, as well as just giving us a really cool song performance. It worked really well, and it ended up being a show which wasn't really on my top 10 initially, and then just the more I watched it week by week, the more I began to get more invested into it, and it ended up being one of my favorite shows of the season. Probably not of the year, but of the season for sure. It's a really fun show. If you like music, anime like Sound Euphonium or Your Lie in April, or other music ones that I'm sure are out there focused on like bands of some sort, definitely check this out. I think it's well worth your time if you're not gonna be having issues about the homosexuality stuff. Next one on this list, and the last one in the bottom 5, is Oh Maidens in Your Savage Season. This is the one show on this list from High Dive, and it's one that I kind of ended up coming into towards the end of its run, because I'll be honest, a lot of the High Dive shows that I watched this season, in regards to Oh Maidens, Demon Girl Next Door, and Wasteful Days of High School Girls, I did not watch them until the very end of the season, like in the last couple weeks here. But as a result, I was able to binge through them, and this one was kind of my top of those, and one of my top of the season. Anyway, the show is probably, as far as I've seen at least, the best look at what high school kids, kind of, and young adults in general, go through in regards to kind of becoming more sexually aware, because the show does largely focus on sex. It doesn't show it to any degree really, but it does get talked about in pretty much every episode to some extent. And it covers kind of the different forms that it can take in regards to kind of being sexually attracted to someone, opposed to just being in love with somebody. Just kind of seeing that duality. You see someone who kind of like Given doesn't realize that she's attracted to other girls until she starts to realize that that's what's going on. And you see other aspects of that come into play as well. Teacher-student relationships being a kind of a bigger one, which kind of goes to some issue-y places. But it's a very well done show in that aspect. It's not like hugely fan service-esque. I think it's going to be very relatable for any kids who end up watching it, or not kids, but like teenagers or young adults who end up watching the show. And that said, it's also probably the funniest show this season, I think, because it has a lot of comedy within it. These situations are largely played for laughs, but they're also taken very seriously at times as well. And I did think that the finale, which does wrap up the story in its entirety, it is pretty much going to be a standalone 12-episode show. It's not going to get a second season, as far as I can tell. It doesn't really have any need for one. Yeah, I thought that wrapped up all the story arcs really, really well, really tastefully. Yeah, I overall really enjoyed it. The last line of the show kind of had me chuckling as well, just because it kind of does a callback to something from earlier in the show as well. And I just found that to be kind of funny. But yeah, Oh Maidens in your Savage season, it's very good. I highly recommend checking it out. If you don't have Hideout, definitely get a subscription for this show, because I think it's that good. And also check out Demon Girl Next Door and Wasteful Days of High School Girls. They're not as good as these top 10, in my opinion, but they're still worth checking out, I think. And now we come to the top 5 of the summer 2019 anime season. And these are a lot of shows which I think are going to be on most people's top 5. I think, at least the top 2, probably. And so, yeah, let's get into it. Number 5 is Fire Force. This was probably at my number 3 spot for a while, and then 2 other shows overpowered it. So, Fire Force, kind of similar to Promare, which I watched and reviewed a week or so ago. It deals with this society that, for unknown reasons, started having people spontaneously combust, and instead of essentially developing fire powers like in Promare, they end up basically becoming infernal demons, or like fire people who are not able to really control the damage that they're causing. You also have people who do develop various fire abilities who end up becoming firefighters, essentially just using a play on the term. And that is where our show mainly focuses. It focuses on a new firefighter who has this kind of quirk where when he gets nervous he has this really demonic smile, and so it kind of throws people off. And so it's kind of a fun thing to see that happen. The show is a 2-core, so it's only halfway through its season, so I think that's going to progressively get better. And this is a show which I really am enjoying. The art style is very fun to look at. I think it really stands out. You have these really flashy characters. The OP is also something which I immensely love. It's probably my favorite opening of the entire season, just because I immensely love intros which kind of tell like a mini story with their 1.5-minute opening sequence. Konosuba's second opening did this, and then also I think the third opening for Nisekoi also did that. So it's just things like that which I really enjoy. But I like how they both distinguish all of our main characters by their fire powers. There's one person who kind of has like cat-like abilities, where she can kind of sprout tails, and she just kind of has feline athleticism, and kind of can use her abilities in that sense. You have somebody who can use like a plasma sword and control that. You have our main character who can basically shoot fire out of his legs as kind of propulsion to fly around in the air. And then you have people just with a variety of other powers as well. It's just really interesting as the stories now begin to open up a little bit more. We're seeing more of the different departments and fighting force be shown on screen. You can just see examples of how these powers are so unique to these different individuals and how they all utilize them in different ways. And so the story, like I said, is still ongoing, but it's been very immensely intriguing thus far, and I really liked especially the storyline involving, I think, the District 5 leader, who has like the flower powers and has the connection to the nun girl. That backstory was really fun to see shown, because it's been something that's been hinted at with the ending sequence, because they basically kind of show that whole thing, kind of how she ended up with the Fire Force. And so it's just a really fun show. I really enjoy it, and it's potentially, depending on how the last half of the season goes, going to be in my top 10 of the year. I don't know, but we'll find out. Number 4, I think, is probably the surprise of the season for me, and that is Belle. This is from the animators, at least I know, who did Re:Zero, which is probably one of my favorite anime at the moment. A lot of the characters look very similar. The character models look immensely like the characters from Re:Zero in various aspects. The main premise of the show is a little bit confusing the first couple episodes that you see, because it's a lot thrown at you at once. The show focuses on a young girl with pink hair who ends up finding herself involved in this ancient battle in which various people are basically fighting for the title of a mage, of basically this being this great mage to this immensely magical entity. And they basically are able to summon mechas based on their personalities and based on like their fighting spirit, essentially. And they use those, they fight each other, and the goal is to be the last one standing to hopefully be deemed worthy enough to become this great mage. And just over the course of the show, you really get to see the backgrounds and how important this whole sequence is to these characters that are involved in this fighting. Like with Anna, who is one of the first characters to end up getting killed off, shockingly. Her arc is probably one of the most intense and most interesting ones of the show, in my opinion. Just because while she comes off as this really nasty person right away, the more you kind of understand where she's coming from in regards to why she's so intent on taking down this girl who she's going after, you kind of get to understand a little bit more about why that's happening. It's not necessarily justified, but you kind of get to see where she's coming from, because this girl that she's going after is someone who she kind of took in. She basically became a mage because of her, and she's just always been more gifted in magical powers and abilities than Anna was, and so she becomes jealous, and a lot of her rage is fueled by jealousy. And just like towards the end of her story arc, it just gets ramped up to another level of intensity, just because it kind of cuts away during the end credits that you could easily miss if you're not watching through them, and maybe watch like almost all the end credits for the rest of the season, because it cuts away and it shows that she has essentially, I think, killed her mother in a fit of like outrage, realizing that she's not quite as powerful as she thought that she was. And it just becomes immensely intense, and it's after that battle when she loses, you realize what the stakes are in the show, in that basically, I believe, from what I understand, if your crystal gets destroyed and if you also get killed in the ensuing fight, you basically get erased from existence. Anyone who was not involved or is not still involved in the Belle battle forgets that you ever existed in the first place, and that shit terrifies me, because I don't know why, just the idea of even like Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai from last year focused on this briefly with the first 3 episodes of the season. It just, that idea just is so well executed in that just seeing that life just goes on without you. It's like ultimately you're not that important, and everyone else just kind of fits into where or adapts to life where you just never existed. And it's just really interesting to see that shown throughout the show, because it's not just her, it's other characters that get this treatment as well. And it's just the first time that you really see, at least the first time I've seen a show which has that high of stakes and is shown immensely well. The battle sequences are also really, really well done animation-wise. Again, it can be a little bit confusing, kind of realizing at first with the first episodes, not knowing really who all the characters are or anything. Kind of who is in what mecha and what is all exactly happening on screen. But by the end, especially kind of helpful that there's like less people on screen at once by that point. The battles do get really, really intense and they're really fun to watch. And again, this was not a show which I really had on my top 10 initially, but the more I watched it throughout the course of the season, it just continued to bump up in regards to my enjoyment of it, and just how much I was looking forward to it week after week after week. If you have not watched the show, definitely give it a look, because again, it's one of the most surprising shows of the season, one which I didn't really even have on my radar right away. And that's just kind of watching because I try to watch as many anime as I can. But yeah, overall, Belle, it's fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed it. We are now in the top 3 of this season, and you could probably interchange these as you wish to. It kind of depends on the day for me, but as it sits right now, these top 3 are, at number 3, Astra, Lost in Space. This is another show which is on Hulu/Funimation, and the main premise of this is that this group of kids in, I think it was like 2063, something in that range, they are basically able to travel amongst the stars and travel throughout space. They end up in this group. It's kind of a tradition with their school, I guess, to go on this kind of camping expedition on this main planet. They just have to basically hang out on the planet, survive for like 3 days, and then they get picked up, and it's like, oh hey, you learned how to work as a team. Unfortunately, during like the first couple hours of this, a giant wormhole opens up amongst them and sucks them all into space in the middle of nowhere. Thankfully, they all remember to put their helmets on, or their helmet air things, and they end up right next to a ship called Astra, and using such ship, they're able to, or they try to throughout the course of the show, navigate their way back to their home planet. Now this show, when it first started, was at my top for the season. Granted, this is before my top 2 shows started really airing, and so I didn't really have anything better at that time to compare it to. But this is easily one of my favorite shows of the season, if not the year, because it is a 12, I believe, episode show, but it tells the whole story within those 12 episodes, and it does enough foreshadowing and laying groundwork for twists towards the end of the show that it's immensely satisfying. I really enjoyed the chemistry between all the characters. You get to see each one kind of have the spotlight in their own episode, or at least in their own way. You see them really have to work together as a team, overcome their own struggles and their own internal struggles to make this whole situation work. And it's like if any of them really make a fatal error, they will die, or not just them, the whole crew could die. And it just really makes the show a lot more interesting, just seeing, again, these characters develop and seeing their backstories come into play. Because as the show goes on, you kind of learn that there's things that they all seem to have in common, and the reason that they all ended up together might not be as situational as they may have initially thought. There might be more behind the scenes as to why they're all grouped together. I don't really want to spoil it in case you haven't seen it, because it does have some immensely large twists towards the end, which I think if you know ahead of time before watching it, you're gonna get something different out of the show than you would going in blind. But the twist towards the end, I did really, really enjoy. I was kind of talking about it with a friend of mine who has read the manga and so knew what everything was going into it, and so just doing theory crafting, him knowing just everything that was going on, and me just kind of spurting out my theories and then looking back at them towards the end. It's kind of interesting to see how close I was with some stuff or how far off completely I was with other things. Because once you know that not everything is really as it seems, you just start to kind of look at things closer and just start to analyze things on a deeper level, just because you know that there's like groundwork being laid for events that are going to unravel later on. But yeah, Astra, Lost in Space, it's, again, one of my favorite shows of the season, if not the year. And it does a lot with its ending. It has a really good and well done ending. It wasn't really what I expected to. And I really liked that the first episode and the last episode are both like two-parters, essentially. They're like doubly long. And this is another one which is on Hulu/Funimation. I'm realizing that a lot of my favorite shows were on that this time. So yeah, check out Hulu if you are interested in any of the ones specific to that I've talked about. Number 2 and number 1. They're both 2 core shows, which are now with this fall season going into their second core, so they both debuted this season. And these are 2 shows which I could probably put in both of these slots, to be frankly honest. But number 2 is Vinland Saga. It's a show which takes place during like the Viking era, where there's like wars going on between England and Norway, I believe, and just seeing everything that's kind of going on amongst that. It focuses on a group of Viking raiders primarily. After events that take place in the first 3 or 4 episodes, a young boy ends up with them and basically ends up growing up amongst them and just becoming the savage warrior who is basically trying to do whatever he can to challenge and take down the leader of this group, who very interestingly kind of becomes a surrogate father figure to him, as much as he doesn't want to admit that. You get to see the relationship grow over the course of the 12 episodes that we've seen thus far. Again, this is based on a manga, which has been going on for a while, so please don't put spoilers in the comments if you've seen it or if you've read more than what the show's done so far. But as of now, I've really enjoyed the show. It's very graphic and bloody, and it's on Amazon, but it's also extremely well done overall. The music is really intriguing and really well executed. The animation has a style to it which really lends itself well to this type of artwork that is necessary, and everything's just incredibly well detailed. It looks amazingly well done on screen, and I really like seeing these characters who at first are kind of perceived as villain characters, but the more you get to kind of see them and where they're coming from and what their daily lives look like, you get to kind of learn more about them and more sympathize with them and what they're doing. It's not necessarily that you agree with it, but you can sympathize with it. So yeah, Vinland Saga, again, probably one of my favorite shows of the season, and this would probably end up on my favorites of the year, depending on how fall ends up going for the second core, as well as other shows which debuted during that time. Yeah, it's really good, and I'm really excited to see where it ends up going from here, where Thorfinn, I think, ends up going in regards to a character's progression, and seeing if he ends up eventually moving beyond this group of Viking raiders who he is currently journeying with. I'm assuming that he eventually moves beyond them for whatever reason. And I'm really curious to see where his story goes from here. Number 1, I think, is a lot of people's number 1 of the season, because I think it's one of the best shows of the season, if not the year. That is Dr. Stone. Main setup for this show, if you are somehow not aware, is that around our modern day, for unknown purposes, a green light basically enveloped the world and basically turned all of humanity into stone, or basically encased in stone, basically petrified. And this takes place, or this happens, and people are all stone for 3,800 years, approximately. And while everyone is technically still alive within the stone casings, if like just natural occurrences within the environment, like you happen to be in a building and that building eventually just collapses due to not being kept up, due to nobody being around anymore, and your stone body gets crushed, you die. Or if like somebody punches your head off, you die. Regardless of you being in stone or putting your body back together when you're being revived and things like that. Eventually, a young genius boy ends up waking up out of the stone casing. He ends up basically using science to build himself shelter and tools and other basic necessities to survive in this natural new stone world, as he calls it. and is basically be able to figure out what is needed to revive somebody from their stone casing. He ends up reviving his best friend from high school, and eventually that guy's and his other best friend, who is a girl, along with someone who ends up becoming his arch enemy, who has a very different philosophy on what they should be doing in the stone world. And a large part of the first couple episodes of the show focus on that conflict between the two characters, because the big guy, who is a lot of muscle, is very opposed to bringing back everybody who is still alive and possible to be brought back from stone, because he thinks that adults in the world basically cause a lot of the problems for the society that was around at the time. And so he's under the impression that if they're all brought back, those problems would just continue to occur and we'd be right back where we started. As opposed to our main character, who is very much for the idea of just bringing everybody back and using science to basically bring the world back up to speed and maybe even surpass where it was when everyone was stonified. And so probably the biggest pull of this show, I think, is how well it uses science in the show. Now, me personally, I've never been a big science person. I was terrible at chemistry in high school, and I've never been huge on like science classes and stuff. So just being able to kind of the idea that I'm able to understand what's going on within stuff that he's explaining, and just basically how he's creating pots and electricity and glasses recently. It's kind of cool to see that all talked about in a very easy to understand fashion, because he does have to explain it to people who have no knowledge of science, because he eventually realizes that there's other people who must have woken up before he did and essentially had lives and basically created a small village, because there's a village that he discovers eventually that we're currently within the arc of, where nobody really in the village has any memory of the modern world, or at least the world from 3,800 years ago. And so he has to explain these really scientific ideas, which have taken not decades, but like thousands of years to come to light and be discovered, to people who have like no idea like even how like fire happens. It's really interesting to see that stuff play out. He's able to gain allies through his use and kind of just the way that he's able to converse with people, because you would think that he wouldn't be the super confident person, but he's just like, he has this persona about him, and I just really enjoy seeing that on screen, and it's just makes him a really likable character, because while he's very know-it-all and he's very, very smart and everything, he's very down-to-earth as well, and he knows kind of how to get people to understand where he's coming from, and also know where they're coming from as well, and how to relate to them. And so I really enjoyed seeing that interaction. I'm really curious to see where this anime ends up going. Again, it's on its second core now, technically. And this is a Crunchyroll produced show, so based on how well received its reception has been, I would be immensely surprised if it doesn't get a second season, just basically right after the finale of season 1. Like, not right after, but probably like airing somewhere next year. But yeah, I can't really talk more about it because I don't know what's past the point that from the last episode that we saw. But yeah, it's really, really well done. The science is easily the best draw. The animation style is fantastic. All the characters look very, very unique. I like the way that it utilizes science within the course of the show. Yeah, everything looks great. And it's definitely my favorite show this season. Aside from Danmachi, which I always watched first on Fridays, this was the next show up after that. Every Friday, because I just really, really enjoy it, and it's one that I cannot wait for each week when the next episode airs. So those are my thoughts on my ranking of my top 10 shows of summer 2019, and the ones that I would say if you're going to choose 10 to watch, check out these 10. Again, I watched 25 shows this season, both ones which were on their second core, which started last season, and then also ongoing ones and ones which had second seasons on their belt. But yeah, it was a good season overall. It had a lot of shows which again, could have been put into that number 10 slot. I think there's a lot of shows which just kind of felt very average. There was Demon Lord Retry, which was one of my favorite shows initially when the season started, and then it just got very kind of boring by the end because it really didn't do a lot to really make itself enjoyable, I guess. I still watched it, and I'll still watch season 2 if it happens, but I don't know, it got less interesting as it went on. Isekai Cheat Magician, another one that I just kind of ended up getting a little bit bored of by the end of it. Another one which I think will probably get a second season eventually, but it didn't do a lot to really immensely interest me. If we hadn't had some of the ones within Copcraft and Vorta in here, it probably would have made the top 10, kind of like Wise Man's Grandchild did last season. Because it kind of has that similar feel to it, where you have a very OP protagonist coming in, saving the day, blah blah blah. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I will be, as of now, doing a best of fall 2019 list before I do my top 10 of 2019 overall list sometime in December. So look forward to that in a couple months. I'll also be seeing the Rascal Is Not Dream of a Dreaming Girl film, which is a sequel series to Rascal Is Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, on Wednesday. So I'm very excited for that because that was my favorite show last year. And then in November I'm seeing the Konosuba movie, The Legend of Crimson. So a couple anime films coming down the drain in the next couple months, which I'm very, very much looking forward to. But those are my thoughts on the summer of 2019 anime. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What were your favorites of the season? What did you not like of the season? Did you agree with my list? Did you not? Let me know. I've now watched anime for basically a year straight, because I started really actually watching everything summer of last year with How Not to Summon a Demon Lord and Island and other things I'm not remembering. So yeah, it's really fun to have gone a full circle now, and I'm excited for the future, as cheesy as that is. Like, favorite, comment, and subscribe once again if you so choose. I appreciate it immensely. And as always, my good people, my name is Nick Pell, and once again, keep on watching.